I heard that you are fond of the manga, so I noticed that like the.
All my manga books are upstairs. Oh yes, yes. Well, this is because at the moment one of my ambitions at the moment is to write a graphic novel.
Okay. Like what?
Well, I'm talking to one of the big American comic companies at the moment.
Okay. What is the story about?
I can't tell you that because we're still.
Okay, by the way.
Well, so I'm studying manga, the French kind of style, the bande dessinée of France, manga of Japan, and the comics of America.
What is your favorite manga, Japanese manga?
Well, I have to say, until about a month ago, I knew nothing about these kinds of things. But when I was a small child in Japan, of course, this is what I read. I read manga, and so to some extent, my first ideas about how you tell a story came from manga. Yeah. And actually, even when I came to this country, every month a parcel would arrive from Japan that my grandparents would send, and it would be full of what do you call it, shonen?
Shonen magazine.
Yeah, those kinds of things. Some of them were educational, but there would always be manga.
Ah, yeah.
And so, for my generation, there were famous manga characters that you would never have heard of, like Obakyu.
Obakyu.
Yes. And there was a Japanese version of James Bond, 007. Okay. It was completely different to the. And so I read all those in manga.
So you already get used to the manga thing.
Yes, and in general, there was a side of me that because my parents always intended to return to Japan. I wasn't being prepared really for an adult life in Britain. I was being prepared for an adult life in Japan. So they tried to keep up the Japanese education and my contact with Japanese culture. So, and in those days it was very difficult. We had no internet or Skype or anything like this. So it was really just through books and literature.
So you think those experience related to Japan affects on what you write now?
Yes, I think the thing that affected me most from Japanese culture is Japanese cinema. Cinema has been a tremendously important influence for me generally, and I love cinema from all parts of the world. But the Japanese cinema, particularly of the 1950s, the immediate post-war era, was very, very important to me from a very early age, and it continues to be for me. In particular, Yasujiro Ozu films were a big model for me. When I started to write my fiction, and in fact, some people have said they've noticed that there's a very similarity. Yeah. But also, Kurosawa's Chambara films, and also directors, perhaps less well-known people like Naruse Mikio. People like that are very important to me.
Right. So I think you got a call from Japan. I think. Congratulations, saying congratulations.
Well, possibly. I haven't heard it yet. No.
Okay. So, how do you observe the Japanese society right now? You are living in UK, so long time, right? So, how do you observe the Japanese society right now?
Well, it's very difficult for me to comment about the Japanese society because I'm hardly ever there. So it's not for me to comment on the day-to-day, society or the politics. But because I've lived in this country in the West, and I've observed how the attitude of the West has changed towards Japan during the time that I've grown up here.
You feel that?
Yeah, and I think it has changed considerably. When I was a child, Japan was very much associated with the Second World War, and there were quite stereotypical negative views of Japan. Then there was a phase when Japan was overwhelmingly identified with high tech. What was high tech in those days? The hi-fi and cameras and all those kinds of. And so Japan had that image, but Japanese people were still seen as slightly alien, almost like robots.
Right.
I would say in the last 20 years, 25 years, perhaps because the economy stopped growing at such a fast rate in Japan. People started to appreciate Japanese culture, so Japanese food, Japanese literature, Japanese movies, Japanese art. These things have become very important to people in the West.
Right.
And so I think for my daughter's generation, Japan is something very different. Even things like manga or anime or Pokemon. I mean, these are things that the younger generation grew up with. Everyone loves sushi and things like this. Writers like Haruki Murakami are very, very important to people in the West, and particularly young people in the West. And so I feel there's a very different image of Japan now. Japan has a tremendous cultural force that it didn't have when I was a teenager, or even when I was a student. People are less aware of Japan as the economic force, but people are very aware of Japan as a very important cultural force.
I see. So